As I said, my name is Sharantha Bettigay. I'm a saxophone player, a composer, and educator from Toronto, Canada. And I grew up in Canada. I spent some years living in the States. I know I have a lot of folks from the States on this call as well. I went to school in Rochester, New York, and New Jersey, taught in Georgia for a while, but I've been back in Canada now since 2009. I've been a part of the ADE community for the past 3 years. I'm a Canadian ADE 2017. I don't know if we have any other 2017 people on this call, but there may be some of my friends here. I'm not sure. But the reason that I'm putting these three things on the slide is to kind of demonstrate the idea that I sort of think of these three activities that I do as part of my professional life as very interconnected by one thing, and that is the establishment of flow. When I am practicing the saxophone, when I'm composing, when I'm teaching, I'm really trying to get into a state where I can express myself and my ideas, and my students can, hopefully, in a way that is creative and is in the moment and isn't being impeded by the tools. A lot of my musical colleagues, one of my musical colleagues has a great saying about practicing, and he says that when you practice, you should try and make the instrument disappear. And I think of technology the very same way. I'm sure it's not uncommon for all of us to be spending a lot of hours on our devices these days. And for me, when I'm using my Mac, these keyboard shortcuts and text replacements that I'm going to show you today have really helped me to sort of treat this keyboard and this Mac and this computer like another instrument that I feel comfortable with expressing my ideas and getting out in a cohesive and productive way, and doing it in such a way that the instrument doesn't impede the flow of my ideas in the moment. So that's what I love about all of this stuff, and that's why I'm excited to talk to you about it. Now, chances are you probably know a few keyboard shortcuts already. Being that we are ADEs and Apple employees, et cetera, we probably know more than a few first-party keyboard shortcuts. This is not going to be the focus of this session because I'm imagining that you probably have a few of these things, or maybe a lot of these things at your fingertips already. Things like the examples at the bottom of that screenshot: Command X, Command C, Command V. These are common kinds of keyboard shortcuts where you're using a letter plus a modifier key like Command or Control or Option to be able to control your Mac in different ways. These are also available, by the way, on your iPad if you have a keyboard connected to it. And this is an example of the Mac Apple Knowledge Base article that is a wonderful resource to check out if you want to see the hundreds of possibilities of keyboard shortcuts that you probably already have on your device. So I would suggest that as a kind of starting point. But really what we're going to be talking about today is using custom keyboard shortcuts that we're going to create inside of system preferences. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through one or two different examples of how to do this and give you some time in a few minutes to actually practice this as a group. So here's one very particular problem that I have. I work at a school where we have Office 365. The school is very Microsoft centric, and I use Microsoft apps and I use Apple apps all the time. I typically use Apple apps for my own personal purposes, or when I'm just trying to make a PDF or something that I don't have to share with my colleagues because I'm not sure which version of Mac apps they're using, or if they're students, how old their laptops are, or what they're using. But I tend to drift back and forth between Microsoft and Apple apps all the time. And because of the fact that I like to use keyboard shortcuts, I find this is a very particular problem. Say I'm in Apple Mail, and I'm going to go send a message inside of Apple Mail, and we'll see here, if you go up into the menu bar, there is a keyboard shortcut, and that is Shift-Command-D. So if you've used Apple Mail, that's the default shortcut for sending mail. And as you can see, by the way, anything in a menu bar, I'll just pause here and say that anything inside of a menu bar can be assigned a keyboard shortcut, even if it doesn't have one already. So that's what it looks like inside of Apple Mail. If you want to send a message, you hit Shift-Command-D. But of course, if you go over to Microsoft Outlook and try to do exactly the same thing, send a message, and the keyboard shortcut is Command Enter. So by default, they're different. Now, that's a particular problem for me because I'm flipping back and forth between these applications all the time. You could think of it the same way with Microsoft Excel and Apple Numbers, for instance. You have lots of common commands, but they might be shortcutted differently or not at all. But of course, we can fix all that. So I'll go through this procedure once and then maybe repeat it again, because if you're not familiar with this may be a lot to take in the first time. So I'll repeat it. So if we go into System Preferences, we're going to hit the keyboard area. And then there's a Shortcuts tab at the top, which is already selected here. Then I'm going to select App Shortcuts and hit the plus button. So I'm going to take this time to make a shortcut inside of Outlook, not inside of Apple Mail. And I'm going to create a shortcut that matches what we've got in Apple Mail. So I'm going to type the title of the command from the menu bar, and then just hit Shift-Command-D, and then click Add. And now all of a sudden we have a keyboard shortcut that is specific to Microsoft Outlook. Again, I'm going to repeat that process one more time. You click on Keyboard, Shortcuts, App Shortcuts. You go to the plus button. As you can see, you can create shortcuts for all applications or for specific ones. That can come in really handy if there are common commands in many applications that you want to do at one time. This is also very important. The menu title is case sensitive, and you have to type it in exactly the way that it's written in the menu bar. If there's a ... you need the ... You click Add, and now we've got the keyboard shortcut. Okay, so hopefully that's worked. Let's go back into Microsoft Outlook, and we'll see if it has been successful. Go up into the draft menu, hit send, and now we can see that the keyboard shortcut is exactly the same as it is in Apple Mail. So, ta-da, problem solved. Very handy. So, as you can see, this is a quick way to be able to standardize these processes in between different apps, because that can really help your workflow. At least in my case, it's very, very, very handy. Okay, any questions about that so far? Just going to pause here because I've seen a little bit of activity in the chat. Okay, one thing I'll point out, by the way, the first time I tried this exercise, I went the other direction. I wanted to try to make the Apple Mail shortcut the same as Outlook, as in Command Enter. And interestingly enough, when I tried to do that, it didn't work properly, presumably because there was already something inside of Apple Mail that had been assigned to that key combination. So by default, it won't let you assign the same keyboard shortcut to two different things. Obviously, that would be very problematic. So that's just something to play around with. Okay. So that's the first tip. Now the second tip, text replacements. This is my favorite. Okay, so here's the idea behind a text replacement. Can I just ask that everybody mutes their mics, please? Thank you. Great, thank you. So text replacements. Text replacements are very simple. They are essentially an abbreviation that is expanded into a larger string of text. So I want you to think of something that you might type repetitively every day, every week, say a short string of text that is maybe like less than a line long that you could see being very useful if you abbreviate it. Go ahead, type it in the chat if you are thinking of something. So it could be anything. Something that you type repetitively, regularly, that is longer than you would like it to be, essentially. Maybe I'm being too vague in my comment. Okay, hashtags. My various email addresses. Good. Yes. Hashtags are great. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, good. Email addresses, hashtags, names, phone numbers, all kinds of little things like that can very easily be assigned a specific text replacement. And again, you don't actually need third-party apps to do this. You can do this with system preferences as well. And let me show you how. Okay, so we're going to go back into system preferences and do a very similar thing, but there's a different sub-menu that we need to go to. So we're going to click on keyboard, and now I've got the text tab selected. Hit the plus button. And I'm going to say my name, first name, last name. Notice the prefix X. This is a very important one for me, and I'll tell you why in a moment. I'm going to do another one for my city, XBU for Burlington. As you may have guessed, I'm using the letter X because there aren't too many words in the English language that start with the letter X, so it's very difficult for you to mix that up with something else that you might normally type. Sometimes I use a period or a comma in advance of the text snippet in order to do the same thing, but I really like X. By the way, these shortcuts will sync up with iCloud with your other devices too. So if you set them up on your phone, you should eventually, excuse me, if you set them up on your Mac, you might actually see them on your phone as well. Okay, we got some ADE hashtags as well. Do you have any tips for remembering them all? That's a great question. Right. So I'm going to stop here and say, this is something to consider, right? I would start by just making some obvious ones, like when you're creating these abbreviations, just maybe start with a name, start with a phone number, things that are very obvious, and use abbreviations that are extremely short and highly memorable to you. Try to make them as short as possible, 3 characters, 4 characters when you're starting. I like to just think of them in that way. XEM is my main email address, personal. XHEM is my Humber email address. XCEM is my wife's email address because her name is Caroline. Things like that are quick tips that I use to be able to make these memorable and you know, not as easy to forget. There are some limitations behind this inside of system preferences, and I'll show you, but in general, this is a good starting point. So let's just try this out. Now we're in the text edit app. You could use this in any app that involves text, Safari, whatever you like. I'm going to type in, hi, my name is XSB, and I live in XBU. And I'm really looking forward to this month. And then, whoops, hashtags. Done. Yes. So as you can see, that's a quick way to be able to take these little text snippets that you would regularly use, or even for a time, that can be very, very helpful for you in terms of your productivity. And you know, I can't tell you how many times a day I have to type my own name, and how many times a day I would be prone to actually misspell it. Simple things like that are really, really nice if you shortcut them with text replacement. Awesome. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of love for the X. This is great. It makes sense, right? Use a character that you like. The other thing that's nice about X is that rather than using a comma or a period as a starting point, for instance, is that it's not a special character. Yes, it's beside the space bar, as Gerard is mentioning. It's a really, really great tip, because even if you're typing on an iOS device, you've got X. X is right there. It's right in your main set of characters. You don't have to fiddle with anything to get to those other characters. It's very quick and very handy. The only thing I don't like about how this applies in system preferences, if I'm being really honest, is that hopefully you saw when I just demonstrated that in TextEdit, it prompts you for the text expansion like it's an autocorrect. It's essentially saying, are you sure you want this? And then you press the space bar in order to commit to it. I don't actually love that about system preferences in the way that this is implemented. But it's a small thing. You've got it on all your devices, and it's available to you. But there are some other options besides system preferences that can make this a little bit more smooth if you're concerned about that kind of thing. There's a bit of information here on this slide, but this is also located in that PDF handout that I gave you. If you want to compare the differences between system preferences and these other two options, just take a quick look at this. Essentially, in system preferences, we're just using plain text as a text replacement. But with TextExpander and Keyboard Maestro, you can format the text and the images. Back to someone's question earlier about searching and folder support. With TextExpander and Keyboard Maestro, you get the ability to search through all of your snippets. So if you've done more than just a few snippets, this is an incredibly useful feature that will come in very handy for you. You just fire up a hotkey and you can search through all of your snippets to put them all in one place. And you can also organize them. And I'll talk about fill-in fields and date math in a moment. That will make more sense if you're not familiar with these apps. And also the last thing about actions and triggers, I'll get into that when we look at Keyboard Maestro in a moment. That'll make more sense. But hopefully you can already see that there's a big difference between these different possibilities. So here's an example of my bajillion TextExpander snippets. Now, some of these things will look very similar to what you can do inside of system preferences, but some of them obviously are not. Let me just zoom in on a couple of different things. Well, here's one that probably many of you can relate to. In the fall, my school is going to be going almost entirely online as far as education goes. I'm going to be doing all my classroom from right here where I'm standing for the next several months, if maybe not the next year. And I'm going to be using Zoom for that. And there are certain types of Zoom links that I'm going to be using recurrently for weekly meetings with students. And I want to have those easily available. So I've set those up as text snippets as well. As you can see, I labeled this one zoom.instant. So when I type that combination of characters out, that gives me my instant meeting link. So if I need to have a quick meeting with a colleague, it's a super quick and easy way to be able to get to that point. So this is where that dot comes in when you've got a longer snippet. Sometimes it's useful to have special characters like periods and commas that can separate different parts of a text snippet. So as you can see, you can really get creative with how you organize these things. So I've got all my Zoom meeting links in here. Here is another one that I'm sure all of you as teachers can relate to: feedback. When you give feedback to students, sometimes you will make similar comments to many different people, obviously. And you don't want all of your feedback necessarily to be boilerplate text, as they say. I don't think it's necessarily useful to have all of your comments be preconceived. You want to make personal feedback to students when you can, but sometimes when you have little things that you can use to augment feedback that are standard, that can be very helpful. So when I type in APA-NW, when I'm marking my essays for my music education students, this text snippet will pop up, and it's, a couple of sentences long, but this is going beyond what you can do in system preferences because it's more than one line of text. So that's very useful as well. Okay, so here's one that I think will drive home the usefulness of TextExpander to you. So I've created a folder of keyboard shortcuts for this workshop, and there's only one shortcut in there right now because I'm just going to use it as a demonstration. And all of the folders on the left-hand side of the screen are folders of shortcuts that I've created. So there's a lot of them. And if you just take a look at the interface, you can see a few things. The first thing is that you can see that where it says expand in on the right-hand side of the screen under group settings, you can actually choose to have certain text expansions show up inside of certain apps as opposed to all of them, which is a very useful thing if you're, say, working in Word or Pages and you want to have different snippets for different applications. I personally don't use that feature, but if you want it, it's there. So I'm going to show you something that I use in my music education class. Every year, my students do a practicum, a 6-week practicum, where they go and they shadow another teacher. And some of these teachers are not from our institution, and I don't know them personally. So I want to send a letter to them at the beginning of the semester saying, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. This person is in your class, and I want to tell you what this is about and give you an idea about what's in store." So I'm going to go into TextExpander, and I'm going to press New Snippet. And then I'm going to give this a label. I'll call it Practicum Letter to Teachers, and give it an abbreviation. In this case, I'll call it prac.letter. And then I'm going to type in this text. Now I'm just going to copy in some text that I've created previously just to speed things up. So here's an example of a form letter. And now you're going to get to see what this really looks like in practice. There's a little preview button down at the bottom, looks like an eye, where you can see what this is going to look like as it stands when you expand it. So this is not particularly useful yet, But now watch what happens under today's date. I'm going to select today's date, and I'm going to use some date math. Excuse me, not the date math. Couple of places up, we're going to add today's date into this snippet. So today's month is there. And again, we'll do the same thing, and we will add the day, which is down at the bottom of your screen. And then we're going to put a comma and then add the year. So if we hit the preview button again, we're going to see that now we've got July 9th, because I did this example yesterday. Now here's where the real fun part happens. We're going to take all these all caps bits of text and replace them with fill-in fields. This is a single line field, so just going to be typing in the teacher's name here. And as you can see, it's giving you an option to give the field a name, which is very useful in a moment. So that's where we're going to type in the teacher's first name. And now here's the part where we're going to see some nice automation happening. We're going to do the same thing with the student first name. Oop, a little bit of a hiccup there. Sorry. Create the student first name field, and then create a student last name field. Same idea. And now we've got the student last name. Whoop. All right. And now we're going to take all of those student first name fields later on in the letter and just copy that information, hit Command C to copy, and stick it in there. So every time we have that field, just going to try that copy command again because I don't think it took the first time. We're going to go through and paste, 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 paste all the way through this letter. So that field is taken care of. Okay, now we're done. So we've now created the form letter. Pretty easy, and as you can see in the preview, we've got the information that we need, and we're going to have to fill in the rest later. So that's step one. Pretty easy, just took some plain text and added some dates and fill-in fields. Okay, now the magic. We're inside of Outlook or whichever email program you want. I'm going to type prac.letter, and magically a TextExpander window will pop up on the screen. Here's the fun part. Type in the teacher's first name, and then the first name of the student, and the last name. Click OK, and ta-da, form letter. So just like that, we've been able to create an easy form letter that allows you to be able to quickly automate the process of something that you do repetitively. And as teachers, you might have a variety of ideas that are popping into your head right now. I can think of maybe letters to parents, letters to students, various types of feedback. You can incorporate it into a rubric that you could stick into Pages or Microsoft Word or anything like that. All of these different things are really nice features that are incorporated into TextExpander. Yeah, it's really awesome. It's like mail drop on steroids. Yes, exactly. Yeah, thanks. It's a really, really great feature, and I use that all the time. So this is one of the value-added features that you get from something like TextExpander that you wouldn't get in system preferences. That is just one of many features that I could show you, but just wanted to let you know that, again, I have absolutely no affiliation with this software or this manufacturer whatsoever, but I did email them a couple of days ago, and Stacy from Smile Software got back to me and said, just wanted to let you know, please send everybody my email address. if they want to try an educational discount. You can try a free trial of this for, I believe, 14 days to just see how it is. But if you want to buy it, it's a subscription-based software, and I think it's normally $30 or $40 a year US. And this educational discount applies if you email them using your educational email address. So she just wanted me to pass that on to you. And there's TextExpander in a nutshell. Any questions? Okay, awesome. All right, last but not least, my absolute favorite, Keyboard Maestro. Now, I noticed just from the survey that we did earlier, very few people are familiar with this, at least on this call. This has kind of been one of these apps that has become the sort of automation Swiss Army knife for me on my Mac. And it can basically do anything that you can imagine in terms of automating what you do on your computer. I'm going to give you two quick examples. It can do text expansion like TextExpander does. I tend not to use it for that purpose, but you can use it for that purpose as well. It's a one-time purchase Mac-only app, and the closest parallel that I can give to you is that it's like iOS shortcuts, except it's on the Mac. It's similar in many ways, but it can do a bunch of other things that you can't really do on an iOS device because it's just a different interface. So here are two quick examples. So I mentioned in the description for the session that I was going to talk about automating websites and things like that. I'm going to show you something very similar using the idea of automating graphically based pieces of software. And again, I don't have any coding background. I just wanted to let you know that I'm doing this without really much knowledge of these kinds of, I don't know, Python or JavaScript or any of these things. I'm just using the features within the app to essentially create the same end result. So for example, I'm in the music app on my Mac. Many of you are familiar with this, I'm sure, the former iTunes. And as a music teacher, of course, I'm in this app all the time and creating all kinds of different playlists for my students, like the one that you see here on the left. Now, the one thing that I don't like about the music app is some of the views that I get when I'm looking at playlists. Sometimes I just want to see the old-timey iTunes song list where you see a bunch of songs in a row, no album art, just the name of the song, the artist, the title, that kind of thing. That's what I miss, and I like to be able to see that. That is in the songs view, and that's what I just clicked on right there. And let me just rewind that tape a minute and say, I'm clicking on that button, the songs button, by pressing a keyboard shortcut. I'm not actually pressing a menu item because as far as I know, it doesn't exist. So again, I'll press the keyboard shortcut and boom, we are now in the songs view. Now, this is the kind of thing that Keyboard Maestro can do that sort of sets it apart. So it can actually do something very slick, and that is click found images on the screen. So on the right-hand side, you're going to see Keyboard Maestro, and I've got this little macro called Song Library. And essentially what it's telling the computer to do is when I press Option S, it's going to click on a found image that I've just screenshotted from earlier. And that found image is, well, songs. So it looks for that image in the app that you're looking for, and it will move the mouse and click that particular image when you press a keystroke. It's pretty brilliant. So again, that's one very particular example from the music app. But if you think about it, if you work a lot in web-based apps like I do, my learning management system at Humber is Blackboard. Blackboard is entirely web-based. We use an older version of Blackboard. The interface is not the most up-to-date. And there are no shortcuts. There are no hotkeys. It's not like YouTube where you can press different hotkeys to get around the video. In Blackboard, everything is point and click. And I work in there sometimes for hours a day when I'm marking assignments and things like that. So the ability to be able to click found images on the screen is really, really useful and helpful. So that's one thing. And I saved the best for last. We're still in Keyboard Maestro. Okay, you've seen this already. The last thing that I wanted to show you is something that hopefully you can all relate to, and that is something inside of Keynote. Now, we're still talking about Keyboard Maestro here, but what I wanted to show you is something, I can send you this Keynote file if you're interested, but essentially what I do is I teach music theory to undergraduate students, like I mentioned, And when I'm doing these lesson prep for the week, I put together a Keynote template with my slides, and then I use my iPad to broadcast them into GoodNotes, et cetera, et cetera. But everything starts in Keynote for me so that I end up with a slide deck for the week. And it starts with a template. But what I wanted to do is just show you what a finished product might look like. So this is an example from one of my theory classes. I've got headings, I've got titles, I've got some pictures, and I've got some text. I'm going to throw in some examples from our textbook. I'm going to do some handwritten things of my own, some musical examples, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can see, there's a certain kind of a structure to it. And every week, that template looks more or less the same in terms of how it's organized. Of course, the content is different. So in this next slide, I'm going to show you what that template actually looks like. Again, you'll see it's almost identical. Whoops, sorry. Let's try that again. So this is the Keynote lesson template. It's got some text, it's got some images, it's got some things that I use just about every week in terms of the overall structure. What I wanted to show you is the first slide. So this is where Keyboard Maestro is going to come in. What I'm going to do is take this template file and make it into a personalized, customized file for this week's lesson. And it's going to use the lesson name field in the first slide and the course name field in the first slide as variables. If you're familiar with coding, you understand the concept of variables. They're little pieces of information that can be stored in the computer's memory and used repetitively. So this is what I'm going to harness the power of Keyboard Maestro for. So this is what the Keyboard Maestro macro looks like. I'm going to explain this to you because the interface might look very odd. Basically, look at the right-hand side of this picture. Ignore what's on the left and just follow my cursor. So when I press a hotkey, it's going to ask me, okay, what's the name of the lesson? That's lesson name. And what's the name of the course? Course name. It's then going to duplicate the file from wherever it exists, move a copy of that to the desktop. It's going to rename the file with the name of the lesson that I just specified. It's going to open that file inside of Keynote. It's going to pause and wait and make sure that Keynote is open and that the file is open. And then it's going to do a bunch of find and replace actions with that information that will take the lesson name and the course name and put it inside the file that I'm already working on. And all of that is going to happen with a hotkey. So let's say in this case, we could even use a text snippet. I'm going to call that km.lesson. So there you go. I hope that wasn't too much information, but essentially it's doing about 10 different things in one go with one shortcut. So let's see how it works. This is the big finish. Okay, so you're seeing my desktop now, and I'm just going to open up Spotlight. Could be anything. I'm going to type km.lesson. And now we type in the lesson name. Sure, we're going to win at Battlemania. Why not? ADE 2020 is our course name. Little find and replace. And that all happened automatically. And if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see in the desktop, once I hit the save key, that file has now been correctly titled and it's got the right contents. So that's one small example as to what Keyboard Maestro can do. It's a stupidly powerful automation tool for being able to use all kinds of different things on your Mac in a very efficient way. Again, you may be wondering, why is this useful? Well, For me, I'm doing this exact same workflow every week because I'm creating a new lesson from a Keynote template. I'm doing the exact same actions repetitively. So why not automate the process and not have to fiddle around with the tools too much, and reuse information in a way that is useful for me? So I find this to be a really, really powerful tool for automating my computer in many ways.